Hey folks, today I'm going to be running you through how to do this, which is essentially going to be advanced UI, and yeah, just kind of taking advantage of what Unity has available in terms of um, capability with the animation tools, what you can do with like a relatively small amount of code. You can do some like pretty extravagant animations. That will just substantially improve the quality of your project. So the first part of that is going to be showing you how to actually design buttons themselves. So for me, I'm going to be using this tool, Sprite, which I would recommend you to use as a relatively cheap image editing tool. There are lots of other free alternatives out there, so feel free to use things like Krita. Probably wouldn't use Microsoft Paint. Ironically, it's actually got worse Microsoft Paint for doing pixel art than it used to be. So yeah, stick to. I wouldn't. I would stay away from Microsoft Paint if I were you. Anyway, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to make this, I think probably 64 by 64. The reason I've chosen those numbers is powers of 2. I could have used whatever numbers I wanted, but I find using powers of 2 is quite a useful metric for gauging scale for different assets. When you open this tool, you'll have a different color palette to what I have. If you click on, this is going to be like a very small thing specific to Sprite, but if you have a look up here, click on the little presets thing. There's lots of different presets you can choose from for color palettes. You can see here there's like a little Game Boy one here, which is quite nice. Yeah, but I've got like a predetermined palette that I use for all my games. Another thing that I've mentioned elsewhere is that there's a website called Coolors or Colors. It's got a funny spelling, so it's COOLOSRRS, I think it is. You should be able to find it online, which is a very good tool for creating preset palettes, and you can customize and refine them. But yeah, get a good color palette figured out, and then we're going to create a button. So if you're setting this up in Photoshop, there's another video that I'll link to, which kind of gives you the rundown of how to optimize Photoshop for sprite production. So I'll link to that in the description. It's quite an old video, so some elements might be outdated, but yeah. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the the pencil tool, and for you can kind of design this however you want. I'm just going to be showing you how I usually design my buttons. So I'm going to be using the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to be holding Shift, clicking the first point, and then clicking the following point. And rather than going all the way to the bottom, I'm going to stop a couple of pixels ahead of the bottom, and that will become apparent why I've done that in a second. So now I've got this square. I'm now going to use the paint bucket tool, which is this one here. By default, this might be defaulted to the gradient tool, but yeah, it's this little drop. Fill that in. So I've got like a nice little button now. If I wanted to color this, that's great. Some useful little hotkeys, for this tool. One that I really think is useful is if you have a scroll wheel for your mouse, you can scroll back and forth. If you right click, it'll use the alternative color that you have in your palette. If you push X, it will switch between those, the two colors, the foreground and the background color. What else? So if you scroll in and out on your mouse, you'll zoom in and out. If you hold shift, you'll scroll left and right. And I think, can't remember what the other combination is for scrolling up and down. I don't know what that is. Oh well. Yeah, and then your only other shortcuts I think is control. Unlike Photoshop, it's just Control Z and Control Y. In Photoshop, I think it's Control Alt Z. I think it is for going back more than one step for undo. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so we've got this button here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the selection window. I'm going to get the magic wand tool. What I'm wanting to do is kind of create the illusion of a 3D button. So if I use the magic wand tool, which is this one here, select it, the button I've got, I'm going to do Control and C or copy. I'm then going to move this down to the bottom. Why I'm doing this will become apparent in a second. And then I'm going to click paste. So edit and paste. And then I'm going to choose a different color for this new thing I've got. Oh, I did say a different color. And what you can see now is if we zoom out a bit, it kind of has the appearance. It's a little bit harder to see with the borders around the edge. If I just quickly make this up to 128 by 128. And then just chuck a background on. It kind of looks like a 3D button viewed from a slight isometric angle. Yeah, and that's just going to be a real nice little button for us to implement in game. As part of what we're going to be designing, as in what you saw before, if I can remove the fade out, yep, you can see that we've got like one button which is going to be like a key or a method of unlocking the other button. So think about what you want to kind of design for your pop-up button. In this case, I think I'm just trying to think of what I could go for. I'm going to do a cute little pair of eyes. So like that. Don't know if those are equal. Let me check. Yep. Yeah, like in general, like there are tutorials out there on like how to use this tool to its maximum potential. I've been using these kind of tools for years, so I've picked up like a lot of tricks in terms of how to make delicious things. Yeah, like I can't suggest any kind of definitive tutorials. As I said, that I will be linking to one which shows you how to get started in Photoshop, with a lot of bleed over into this. Yeah, so I've got this little kind of cutesy pair of eyes here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a second button for the kind of press down state. So if I come to canvas size, not image size, on canvas size you'll see here that there is, I just need to quickly check this is definitely still recording. Yep, it is. I can adjust the canvas size, so I'm going to double this. This is where knowing your powers of 2 can come in useful. This makes multiplication very easy. And when I do that, you can see it's previewing where this is going to expand into. Now, if we're going to be creating a copy of our button, that's not going to be very useful because it's going to be sliced on either side. So you can see here that there's these kind of arrows which indicate where the expansion is going to occur. So if I click on the left-hand side, it now is expanding this off all to the right. So if I now select all, oh, that's a good shortcut. So Control A is select all, Control C is copy, and then Control V is paste. Yep. One thing that I'd recommend before you paste this is to just change the color of your button just to something else. You can always amend it back afterwards, but basically if we don't change the color of that, we're going to be moving this top section downwards, just to demonstrate what will happen if we don't change the color. I basically want to move down this top bit to make it look like the button's being pushed. But if I use the magic wand tool and then try to select that one button, it'll select both. So that's why we need the two different colors. The other option you can do is when you paste it, just to change this to the kind of highlighted color. So if you imagine when you push down the button, it's going to maybe flash or something like that. Yeah, so I think I might opt for that option instead. So you're kind of shoving the button down and it's illuminating it. So one thing that I just need to do is to select the elements in the top of the button. So you'll see here that I've got this stuff in the middle that it isn't being selected. If I go to the rectangular marquee tool, and I think this is the same for Photoshop as well, if I hold down Shift, that will allow me to add to the selection. So it'll mean the what's known as the marching ants will encompass the eyes and the button itself. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just move those down a couple of frames. Sorry, a couple of pixels. And that should now mean that we've got like a button that can be kind of pushed down. You can see what the animation is going to do. And if you want as well, if you wanted to, animate this as well, just to add a little bit more creative flair, you're more than welcome to kind of, add some kind of wincing eyes to it. Yeah, something like that. Great. Yeah, so now you've got this button that can kind of be squashed down. One thing to emphasize as well is that I'm showing you how to do this with symbols almost. If you wanted to repeat this process, I'll just show you real quick with a wider button. So let's say, let's one that's 128 by 64. You could repeat this process very easily. If I just cheat, and I just do, you wanted to do something with text, you could technically just repeat this process and create a wide button so it's cool. I don't know if this is going to be too big. No, perfect. So yeah, you could technically do the same thing for a button with text on. Although obviously we talked previously about whether you want to have buttons with text on because it makes it less accessible from an international audience. Cool. So we've got that initial button here. Now what we need to do is we need to create our second button. So we're going to do Control A, Control C. We're going to create a new file. As I said, this process should be relatively similar if you're using Photoshop. We're just going to create a second copy, and then we're going to kind of decide what we want in this image here for the play button. So I'm just going to keep things nice and straightforward. Just a nice little play button. If you want to keep these two sides of the triangle equal, what you can do is you can use the select tool. You can use the magic wand tool, select the line that you've got here. You can then do Control C, Control V, and then I believe it's Shift and V will flip the line vertically, and then you can kind of align it up. Shift and H flips horizontally, if you were wondering as well. So we've got that. Making a nice little play button. I'm going to thicken out that back line a little bit because I don't like how it looks. And just bevel off that interior edge. Nope. This process is somewhat of kind of an iterative one for you to experiment with in your own time. I won't waste too much of your own time doing the iteration myself. As with before, what you might want to do is rather than having to redraw this, copy this over. So what I would recommend is to, oh, that's another great shortcut. Holding, it's kind of a weird one. Like if you know a tool, it's hard to kind of remember what is inherent to you versus like, you know, like I almost kind of did that off the cuff. If you hold Alt, I think it's using any tool, no other key, you'll activate the eyedropper, and the eyedropper is really useful for just kind of quickly resampling colors you've used before. So we're going to resample this color here. I'm going to, whoops, not do that. Select the Magic Wand tool, which is W for shortcut. I'm going to select all of this here. You can also, you know, that I mentioned Shift before. You can also use that to kind of select multiple objects as well. This method too. I'm going to copy and paste, and then align that up there, and then change the coloring. And I might just change that to blue as well. Yeah, just to kind of create a little bit of contrast. Sweet. So we've got our two buttons. If I save these, I have a pretty garbage formatting system for my messages. So button, eyes, and then I'm going to call the other one button play, I believe. Play. Hopefully this doesn't exist still. Yeah, great. So that kind of concludes what we're doing in Sprite or in your image editing tools. Obviously, you can kind of create your own elements and experiment further. There's plenty of tutorial content out there in terms of how to use these tools. But yeah, that kind of wraps it up for us here on that. So if we move back into here, I'm going to be creating another version of this inside of this project. So I'm just going to create a new scene. And just to clarify as part of this, there are things that I'm going to have kind of inherent already in this project, which you won't have yourselves, that you'll need to install. I'll run through what those things are, but just to let you know in advance. So I'm just going to call this UI scene. Open that up. Oh, and just for good measure, actually, you know, it should be fine. Yeah. Okay, so we've got this our new scene. We can hide the animator. If you haven't already, it's worth getting your different layouts sorted so you can kind of quickly switch between the different settings. That can be really useful. So yeah, I've got this view of the scene. What I'm going to do now is import my assets. So if I go to assets, you may want to kind of sort this into more kind of definitive sorted folders. So you can see I've got my animated states from my previous stuff. So if I just quickly create a folder for that, demo stuff, can't spell, there we go, chuck those all in there. And then, yeah, if I just quickly create a folder, so textures, and then create another one for later called animations. Sweet. Okay, so I'm going to pop in here, and then we're going to import the oh God, what they're called, the assets from before. So I've got a folder. So what was it called again? It was called eyes, button eyes. Button eyes, button eyes, button eyes. Did I call it? I called it button eyes, didn't I? Let me check. Where did I save this? Huh. I could have sworn I saved it in here. I'm hoping none of you at home are screaming. In that it's a very obvious place that I've saved it. Let me quickly check. Oh, sorry. This is why good organization is probably a good idea. I've saved it in my folder for Morse. So if I just quickly go to the Morse folder, eyes. Oh God, that noise is so obnoxious. So if I import these two. Okay, so yeah, I've got my two graphics here. And Yeah, there's a couple of things we just need to do in terms of prepping them when we bring these assets in. So the first one is relatively straightforward. So if you're dealing with pixel art, in general, a lot of these tools, including like things like Unity or Unreal or even things like 3ds Max, they tend to like assume that you want assets that are high fidelity, smoothened, and don't have any rough edges. So by default, the filter mode is set to bilinear, which is essentially adding like a very subtle smoothness to the textures, which works for most stuff. For most of the game I'm working on at the moment, for the character assets, it actually looks better if you've got you haven't got that bilinear activated. But for pixelated assets, like the units and stuff that I've got in Morse, it looks terrible. So just for context, so you can kind of see, if I import these in here, zoom in, you can see that you get this kind of like blurriness and distortion, which from a distance doesn't look too bad, but from up close looks gross. So the way we fix that is we click on, we click on the asset itself, and then we can go to filter mode and then turn point. So change it from bilinear to point. And then you just need to click apply, and you can see that has already improved the quality of the image. You'll notice as well that you've got these kind of like gross artifacts on here, kind of like JPEG compression, and that's because it is compression and not necessarily JPEG, but it's because there's compression added to it. So setting it to kind of no compression or low compression will get rid of those artifacts. Yeah, so you can see now we've got these assets looking good. Just as a heads up as well, what's really useful is that you can select multiple assets and do this in bulk. So, if you've got like 20 UI elements and you don't want to go through these individually, you can select multiple and process them simultaneously. From here, these are obviously, this is not how we want our button to look in game. We don't want it to be the two states visible simultaneously. So what we need to do is we need to change it from single sprite mode to multiple. And to do that, you will need to download the sprite editor. So the place that you'll do that is under packages, so package manager. And you can see I've already got this installed. So the 2D Sprite Manager. Yeah, so when you click on this button, it just needs to apply the settings. It'll ask you to download it. So go through that process, get it downloaded, and then you'll be back at this point. So we've got this view here. So there's kind of a couple of different ways to chop up your images. Personally, I find there is an automatic system that does it for you. I personally don't like to leave it to automation. In my opinion, the better option is to just divide by cell count. So not by cell size, because again that allows room for ambiguity or mistakes. So cell count is quite a good one. Yeah. So in this case, we've just got 2 rows. So if we slice that, so you've got 1 and 2. So that'll chop the image down the middle. And depending on how you arrange your sprite sheets, you can essentially have, you can mess with all these numbers, so things like offset and padding and where the pivot point is. So that's all really useful. So you can see now that I've sliced this, because it's a relatively straightforward one. You can see this is now broken into 2 images. You just need to click apply. And now you can see that this, compared to this, if I open that one up, it's 1 image, and if you open this one up, it's 2 images. So now if I import this, it's just this one happy chappy. So, yep, if I just repeat the process here. So once again, you can't do it if you've got a single sprite. You need to define it as multiple. Edit sprite editor, slice. And it also remembers your settings from before, which is quite nice. So it means you can kind of speed up your workflow. I don't know if you can do these in the same way we did before in terms of doing them simultaneously, but At least makes the process a little bit quicker. So yeah, cool. So we've got our buttons. What we need to do now is we need to create some UI elements. So again, when I do this, so you'll see under here, I've got UI and then Text Mesh Pro. Unity's in kind of a weird position where you've got like kind of legacy elements that it keeps in there. I may be wrong on this, but I'm relatively certain that Text Mesh Pro is kind of considered more of a standard than the kind of the text tools, because you get a lot more options and it's a lot more malleable. There's a lot more that you can do with it in terms of customization and refinement compared to the original text tools. So we're going to create a button, which is going to be Text Mesh Pro. Now, for you, when you click on this option, it's going to bring up a pop-up that says these tools aren't installed. You need to install these. And yeah, that's really straightforward to do. You just choose the basics option, and then you should be in the position that I'm at, where it just creates a button for you. Now you'll see it's created 2 elements here. Or did it create 3? Yeah, it created 3 elements. So if I just recreate those, it created an event system. It created a button and a canvas. The ones that we're going to be concerning ourselves with today is going to be the canvas and the button. The canvas is essentially your kind of like if we zoom out, this is one thing that I find very, very annoying. So this is the canvas. So your game is like tiddly, like super tiny, and then your game is like your canvas is like this big. I don't know if there's a way to resolve this. I find it infuriating having like the canvas like blocking the gameplay screen. It gets very, very annoying because it centers like right in the middle of your in the middle of your gameplay. I don't know if I think you can do that maybe, but it means that all of your elements are then offset from 0. So yeah, I don't know. I find it very annoying. Maybe someone in the comments wants to write how you fix that. That'd be great. Yeah, so you can see in this canvas here, I've got this button, and you can see on my if I just put these 2 screens side by side, get rid of the asset store because it's pointless at this point. If I just put these side by side, as I move this around, you can see that the button changes location. You can also see as I scale this, whoops, it adjusts the constraints of your viewport of the canvas itself, which can be kind of useful for testing scaling, the scaling of assets. At a very basic level, again, like we talked in the previous presentation about how using something like the kind of asset plugin for what's it called, for your for different mobile settings is a good idea. Okay, so I've got my very basic button. This is as I've mentioned before, anyone that has either this button as a default in their game or has this background, if we just change it to something else, you're going to get penalized on marks. So so if I go to coolers, just real quick, so I'll just give you a quick demo of how this works. So I'm just going to grab the samples of the colors that I've got as part of this scene. So remember, it's Alt and click. So I'm going to create a new palette. As I said, I really, really like this tool. It's a really, really good tool. So if you click generate, it gives you like a bunch of default colors. So if I just click space, it'll just randomly generate color palettes. Yeah, so you can get some really delicious ones. Oh, that pastel one is lush. Yeah, so that's really, really good. What's nice as well is that you can padlock certain ones, and it'll kind of retain certain colors, and then you can narrow down this quite ugly palette. And it'll still kind of try and keep colors that are complementary to what you're like. That one's lovely. I am actually pretty crap at color theory, so using tools like this really helps. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in the the color codes that I've grabbed from here. So you can grab the hexadecimal value, I think it's called. So I've got those, and remember you can click to padlock those. Grab that one there. And then remember that also white is one of the colors as well, so grab that as well. But obviously that one I think it's just FFF. I think that's, yep. So, so lock that, and then white, I guess that's fine. And then, yeah, I can kind of see what colors would complement this. That might work quite nicely. Let's check that out. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just changing my background color to something that is just not that crap blue. Ooh, that might work actually. I'll go for that. I do like pink in my games, but I think this might work a little bit better. Let's see. And yeah, you know, you can kind of drag in these. Oh, whoop, that did not like that. See that I now tried to drag that in as a single asset. It doesn't like that because it's an animation. And also notice that if I try to just drag this in here now, this is the canvas. So unless you explicitly drag it into the canvas, it's going to bring it in as an asset. So keep that in mind. The buttons and stuff are parented to the asset itself. Anyway, so we've set the background color. So we're going to change the attributes of the button. I don't want text as part of it. You can manipulate the text however you fancy. As I said, please try and import a font. Just do something different with it if you are going to use the default, you know, the default button. As I said, I don't need that. You can change the constraints of this from here. So my button was 64 by 64. And that kind of corresponds to the pixel size, and then you can obviously scale and shrink these things appropriately. Now, in the conventional button, if I click play and run this, you can see when I push this, you get a color tint. So that can be quite useful as a button. We're not looking for that though. We want to do something a bit more dynamic with the button, so we're going to change this to sprite swap. And that is essentially going to allow us to bring in, well, first we're going to bob our default image for our little cutesy character in there, and then we're also going to bob in the highlighted sprite there, and then the pressed sprite there. We might actually, let me quickly check, we might actually only need to put in that one, just for being pressed. I don't know if highlighted needs to be filled. Yeah, so that works, just with pressed being filled. The reason that we don't necessarily need highlighted is because on a mobile device, there is no highlight function. Like your finger is either on the screen or it's not. So yeah, in this case, you can actually just get away with just having pressed as a function. So that's just like a really cheap and easy way to do your animations. So you probably want to give this button a label. So call this eyes unlock. And then I'm just going to duplicate this because, as I said, try and keep things as efficient as possible. I'm going to bob this beneath, and then I'm going to just bring in the two other elements of this. So for this one, whoops. Oh, okay. So here we go. All my work being undone. One thing that I would recommend, I still haven't quite got to the bottom of doing it. I'm sure, again, some of you will have been screaming about this. Is adding a play mode tint is a really good idea. Just to kind of give you, I'll just save the hexadecimal code. To give you an example of what this does, at runtime, you can basically tint the background. Black is probably not a great idea because you literally can't see the buttons, but you can add a tint to the screen, which kind of makes it clear that you're not, how do I put it? You shouldn't be editing, like, because you've got that different color. It is a balancing act because you've got to make it subtle enough that you can still operate and adjust settings and things like that, but you also have to make it evident enough so you don't do what I just did and lose all my progress. Yeah, so let me just very quickly redo that. Sorry for wasting your time. So play button. I'm gonna simplify this down. I'm just gonna call this I button. Eyes button. Yep, that'll be fine. Okay, and then quickly add those elements back. One thing that is a little bit irritating with kind of adding stuff to an object, you have to select the object first and then click and hold. If you click on the button or the graphic of the button, it will deselect that and deselect the button and select your the graphic. So you've got to click and hold to add new assets to it. So now if we click play, we should have two buttons. One that does that, and then one that does that. So that's great. So we've got the very beginnings of our kind of functionality in editor. So we're going to do like a very very small amount of coding at this point. So if we come down to here, you'll see that there is this section called on click. So this is useful for handling like very simple kind of UI interactions. For stuff like in-game controls, it's less useful because it's kind of almost like binary states. Yeah, like for like holding down keys and things like that, it's less useful. So yeah, but for purposes of just pushing a button, it's very straightforward. If you just click the little plus button here, it adds a function to the list. What we're gonna do is we're gonna click on this little button here, and because we're inside of the eyes asset, we're gonna if it allows me, go to the scene, and we're gonna choose the asset ourselves. Now at the moment we don't have any script attached to this, so it's not going to show anything up in here, but once we've created our script, we're going to be able to access the variables in the function that we've created. So we're just going to create a new script. So new script, we're going to call this UI logic. Create an ad. And I will just warn in advance that from a programming perspective, like I'm relatively I've been using Unity for the last year. I've spent a decade of building games, but my my background is not in programming. So like I have done programming over the last decade, but like I don't have like a how do I put it? Like I've come programming from not from like an academic or from a kind of a fundamental background. Like I don't. There may be more efficient methods of doing this logic. That's probably the easiest way to put it. The way that I've created this code may not be the best practices. I'm just presenting you a real simple set of logic to demonstrate the capability. Like, if anything, the programming is the least important part of this discussion. The most important part is like what you can do with a tiny amount of programming from a visual spectacle perspective. So we're gonna open up Visual Studio. I prefer this version of Visual Studio because it comes without any of the kind of extra crap that they usually make you install. Very lightweight and easy to use. So we're just gonna create a public void, which is going to be called iPress. Okay. And for the purposes of this, one thing that, as I said, I assume most of you will have used by this point, but debug.log is a really useful thing for It's pressed. It's a really, really useful script for kind of checking stuff or debugging stuff. You know, if you're ever trying to find errors in your script or any issues that you're having, it's like my go-to in terms of, you know, trying to figure out why stuff is broken. So yeah, we've got this UI logic now. You can see that the code's been added. If I go to my eyes button, and then I do, what the hell did I call it again? UI logic. Oh, I've already added it. Whoops. If I go to here now, you can see UI logic has been added, and you can see that I've got this function called iPress. So now if I click play, and then I click on the little eye character, if I move to the console so I can see what the output is. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that not showing up? Huh. Give me a quick sec. Let me make sure I've filled something out correctly. Have I added the wrong one? Let me quickly check. That's strange. Oh wait, sorry. I know what it is. Okay, sorry. Yeah, there we go. I had the debug output disabled. So yeah, you can see that is showing up. I was panicking for a second there. Didn't know what I'd done wrong. Yeah, so that's working perfectly. Sweet. I thought I'd messed up on the most fundamental level of programming there. I was starting to panic. Okay, great. So yeah, if I just quickly get this set up. One thing that's nice that you can do, which can keep things relatively easy. You know, as I said, there's lots of different ways that you could do this. You could create a bunch of custom variables. You know, if you look at the script that I've got for this, like I've done it so you've got like this is all kind of encompassed in one script just because I'm doing something relatively simple. You may want to build something that's a little bit more complex or more efficient. So I'm just going to do a quick copy and paste of this. So it's not going to like that because I've already got that. So I'm going to call this play press. And I'm going to call this I was pressed too. And then a bigger smiley face. Okay, great. So come back to the game. Press play. So if I check this one, that one's pressed. Now that one isn't working because we haven't assigned the thing to it yet. So if we go into our play button, we need to attach our logic, and then we need to, again, come to this view here. We're gonna, where is it? Scene, play button, and then UI logic, play press. So now we should have these two buttons that can be pushed. So that's great. So now what we're probably looking to do is something a little bit more complex. So before we go any further, there's two more visual elements that we want to implement. These are like not going to require anything to the level of what we created before from a visual perspective. One, just to save myself having to re-import it again, is literally just a square. So just a square with the color that matches what the background is. So so this color here. I did not copy that. There we go. So I'm just going to call that. I'm going to put this in the right folder now. Sprite. So background fade. Cool. So if I go to my organization. Oh god, my organization is not great. What did I just call it? Oh, BG, wasn't it? Yeah, BG fade. Okay, so if I pop this open, BG's fade, not that folder. Let's keep to good organization. Bob that in there. Sweet. And I'm going to make a quick copy of that. And I'm going to call this mask. And then I'm going to quickly pop this back open. And I'm going to delete any of the color in it and then send it back. So I've got mask and BG fade. So the background fade, what we're going to do with this is we're just going to bring this in, bring this into our canvas. Wow, that is really small. It might be worth bringing it in as a raw image. So if I right click and do UI and then raw, I think it's either image or raw image. I think it's raw image. I may be wrong on that, just to clarify. And then background fade. So now you can see that is functioning. So this is essentially going to be our, when, if I just expand that to, let's say, 10 and 10, so it fills the whole screen. When we're wanting to kind of transition between scenes, I've got this variable here, what's it called, alpha, to be able to kind of fade in and out, which is really nice. It's very straightforward to implement. So there's that. And then the second thing that we're going to do is we are going to apply a mask. So masks are really, really useful for UI because you can essentially have like contained elements. You know, you can have stuff that expands out of nowhere that is like existent on the screen but masked. You can have long strings of stuff in a menu that isn't visible other than like what you want to be like the focal point. So if you had like 100 costumes but you only wanted to display one at a time, you could have them in like a long row with a mask constraining the view. So the way that you apply a mask, so we need to, as we did before, import an image. So if I do UI raw image, and for the purposes of the mask, you do have to have a texture for it, otherwise it won't work. And oh yeah, we should probably name these. Background fade, and then this one we're going to call mask. Now the way that this is parented is really important. You need to have everything else parented to the mask, so encapsulated within it. And what that's going to do is when we apply the mask, which I believe is I can't remember if it's mask. I think it's rectangle mask 2D, but we'll find out in a second. Yeah, there we go. So you can see this mask now is cutting off the elements in here. So this is now like a little TV box, which is great. We need to adjust the scale of it though. So if I set this to maybe 300, whoops, 300. It's a little bit hard to tell. You can see it more clearly on here. So I think 300 might do. Oh no, sorry, we already got on 300. Try 200. Yeah, that allows both buttons to be visible. Yeah, and you can also see that this is technically cropping the background as well, but since there's nothing else happening on the screen right now, that's not necessarily a problem. But yeah, masks are really neat because what you can do is you could have like nested masks, and you could have like different elements kind of showing and revealing different things. It's a whole like rabbit hole of stuff you can get lost in. So it's really, really good. So if I just kind of start to formalize this a little bit. So the mask is in, I think is in the center. So 0, 0, 0. That is offset. So let's get that sorted out. Bring that down just a wee bit. One thing I would recommend for your UI, if you remember what we did before with the powers of 2, It's probably a good idea to try and maintain consistent units, just so it's kind of easy to space and align things. It's a bit of a faff if you're using kind of obscure units and you're having to like add certain values to it. So like, you know, adding 62 to like, you know, 37 or something like that. You know, it can be quite hard to keep track of. So yeah, I've just used minus 50 and 50 here for the purposes of this. You may want to adjust that for the spacing to be a little bit better. It does kind of irritate me, the spacing of that, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to keep it nice and simple. So we've got our mask, we've got our buttons, we've got our background fade, we've got all the elements we need to kind of finish the exercise. What we need to do now is we need to create a animation function. So there's a couple of ways that we could go about doing this. You know, some people, what they will do is they'll create the animation function specifically for the button. Again, this has worked really well for me. There may be a better practice out there, but for the purposes of what I've been doing over the last year or so, this has worked really nicely for me. I apply the animation to the canvas, and that way I can edit and manipulate everything beneath it. So what I can do is select the canvas. What I'll need to do is, if you haven't got it, you need to come to the window, get the animation elements and bring those out. Again, I have a preset called animation. This one might be default to Unity, but I can't remember for sure. Yeah, so if I do that and I select the thing I want to manipulate, so that'll be the canvas, it will ask me if I want to create an animator or an animation clip. So I can then just navigate to the folder that I want. So animations, and you know, for good practice, I'm gonna just call this, you know, I'm gonna have my A and underscore for animation, and what do I want to call this? So rather than calling this neutral, we're gonna call this fade in, which will become apparent in a second or so once we kind of implement the function for it. But you know, usually when you start creating an animation like this, you may want to have some kind of neutral state for things to be brought back to, and to be like the first instance that the little web, the animation web we're going to build connects to. This system is very fiddly to get used to. As I said, my use of Unity, like extensively as a commercial tool, has only been roughly a year, and when I started using it, I'd kind of transitioned from using a tool called Stencil, and in Stencil it's so easy to do animation stuff, just really, really elegant. You know, you can use like strings to like change the states of animations really easily, and this was just so fiddly and I hated it. But once you get to grips with it, like, it's such a good tool. Like, I've been like, what's the word? Kind of taken aback by like how much you can do in this tool with just animation. Like, I'm just trying to think if I can find this. Okay. Well, okay, I'll just explain. So like, for me, for Morse, I might have it on the desktop. Just give me a quick second. So Morse planes. So if I just quickly load this GIF, so like, let's boot up Internet Explorer. So this these planes here, if I zoom back a bit, these planes have been like purely controlled, like the way that they move through the environment. You can see this one banking up there, and then when these ones like crash, like the way that these like planes are controlled and like move through the space have been like entirely controlled with just the animation. You know, there's like very basic forces propelling it forwards, but the animation tools have been used to change the trajectory of the plane. So like, rather than using like a spline function or something, a spline setup, I've been able to very cheaply implement you know, these animations, and to quite an effective extent. So yeah, like there is real power in using these functions. So we've got our initial fade in animation. What we're going to do with this, as the name kind of suggests, we're going to create a fade state for our background fade. Now, to change the properties of your element, there's two things that you need to make sure you do. First thing is to select the element that you're wanting to manipulate. The second is you've got this little red button here, which is recording. So there's two ways that you can do this. So the first way is that you can add a property. So you can come into here, you can access all the properties of the canvas. You can then go into the subsection. So you've got the mask, you can access all the properties of the mask. You can then come into the subsection of that, and then you've got all the properties of the background fade. So there's as I said, it's quite overwhelming to begin with, but once you get used to it, there's just so much that you can manipulate. Like inside of the image itself, like there's all these changes and these adjustments you can make. For the purposes of what we're going to be doing, we are going to just change the color. And again, make sure that the recording button is pressed. If we come along all the way to the end of the timeline, if you just click on, in this area here, you'll select stuff. If you click on the top timer section, it'll allow you to kind of move the timeline back and forwards. If we come to the end of here, and then we do this, then this is going to have the inverse effect. You can see this fades from out to in. So we want the opposite of that. We don't want it this is going to be when the animation starts, it's going to fade in on the buttons. So we need this initial material to be fully opaque. So that will now fade in quite nicely. Yeah, so if I just quickly bring this down, because I like my kind of transitions to be nice and snappy, I'm going to bring that down to 0.25, so a quarter of what we had before. So if you just click space, you can see that looping. Hopefully not too close to a strobe effect there. And what will happen is this is the entry point in terms of your kind of animation start point. And then this will connect to this animation here, which is your kind of next step. You've got the little arrows connecting. It's what's known as a flow chart or flow diagram. Yeah, so we've manipulated that. That's all we need to do for the fade in. We can now, again, making sure that you've got the property, so the object selected, we can click on this little drop down window here and we can create a new clip. So this new clip is going to be called A_fade out. And this, unlike the previous one, is going to be disconnected from the rest of this. So we will need to manually connect this to this. And the way we do that is very straightforward. Right click on the panel that you're wanting to kind of start the transition from, and then connect that to this here, and then the same in reverse. So we're going to kind of have it kind of go back and forth between the two states. Now, what we're going to do, again, just to keep things nice and efficient, is we're going to, rather than recreating what we did before, we're just going to select our the two frames that we created for the fade in animation, and we're going to reverse them. So we're going to select them first. Again, I think you can do Control A. Yep, Control A, Control C. Go to our new fade out state, Control V. So we now have that animation in. Now, can you see that there's these little blue bars on the end of here? If you grab those, it'll give you how long the sequence is. I am here inverting this, so it starts unfaded and ends fully opaque. So yeah, now that is just a really easy way of reversing animations. You can also use it where you select a large chunk of different properties. So if you have like a full animation and you want to make it a little bit more snappier, you can select that whole section and then you can just bring that down. You can scale it down to something a little bit more compact and shorter. So that's a really nice tool to manipulate. So now, if I just quickly, again, make sure that we save these things. If I quickly test this, you should have it, yep, kind of back and forth fade between these in quite an intense manner. One thing that you should also make sure you do as part of this, to avoid you kind of having any kind of weird side effects, is turn off loop time. Because if you ever have a state that pauses, it will continue to run through the animation. So you can see it runs a little bit slower here now, having turned that off. Yeah, so this is great for initial setup, but it's not really that useful for us in our current format. So what we need to do is we need to create what are known as parameters. So we're going to create a really simple parameter to start off with, which let me check actually. Oh no, it's fine. Yeah, we're going to use what's known as a trigger. So this is going to be, so you've got a bunch of different kind of parameters you can create. You've got float, integer, bool, and trigger. So for the purposes of what we're going to do a trigger. The difference between a bool and a trigger is just something that like occurs, and that's it. Like you can trigger it, but you can't untrigger it. Like it happens and then that's it. A Boolean has the two states, so it can either be false or it can be true. A trigger can only be true. Yeah, if I just create that and I call this fade out, fade out. What we can do is those little arrows that we created before. If I maximize this just for now, you can click on them and it'll kind of break down the properties of the transitions. Now, what you can do with this is, for my animation, what I want to happen is that the fade in is going to be the default state. When you click on the play button, we're going to trigger the fade out state, and that's going to be the equivalent of you transitioning to another scene. So you would begin the fade out process, and then after like a certain length of time, you would then switch to the next scene, and then you would bring in that fade in transition on the next scene. For the purposes of what we're doing here, we're literally just going to have it be, cycling through the animation. But if we want to kind of check, again, not necessarily needing any logic at this point, whether fade out has been triggered, we can come down to this conditions window here, and we can click on the little plus and it'll add that variable. When we add more variables, they'll be kind of listed in here, so you can change the properties and stuff like that. And what's really nice with Unity is that you have, if it lets me drag this over here, you can kind of toggle this in real time and see the effects. So now if we click play, it runs the initial fade animation, but you can see it stops here. So it's completed the animation and it fades. But if I click the trigger, it leaps back around. So it fades out and then fades back in. Very, very quick. I'll just zoom this in so you can see it a bit closer. Yep. Yeah, very snappy. Great. So that's working now. What we need to do now is we are gonna tie that to a button. So that is a pretty straightforward process. And then once we've done that, we're gonna kind of mess a little bit around with the other button that we've created. So to do this, we need to create, we need to come back to our piece of logic from before. And we're gonna create a public animator, which we're just going to call button anim. Okay, and what we're going to do as part of this is, if, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what it is. So it's button anim, and then it'll be sorry, I just remember the stuff off the top of my head. So it'll be parameter, is it? Oh no, so it's trigger. So set trigger, and then we just need to give it the name of the trigger itself. So this will be fade out, I believe it was called when we called it. So that should now work just with that little piece of code. You know, emphasis on should. So if we click that, what have I missed? Button on aim, set trigger, fade out. Did I put the right name? Yeah, I did. Play press. That's peculiar. Let me just very quickly check my other script. Set trigger, fade out. So it's correct, yeah. What am I missing? Oh, I know what I'm missing. I've created this public animator and I haven't pointed it towards what I'm needing. So yeah, as I said, remember when you create variables or create attributes, you need to actually define them. So yeah, if I find my script, so play button, and scroll down to here, you'll see the button anim needs defining. So canvas. That actually could have thrown an error, I think. So if I just define the canvas for both of those things, and just click play. Oh, it's still not liking that. That's very peculiar. Just bear with me a second. Let me just pause this. Okay, so I figured out what the issue was. So yeah, I missed a really basic thing, which is quite easy to slip under the radar. Something I'll quickly mention as well. In terms of the ordering of stuff, I assume you'll all know this by this point, but if you adjust the order, you need something to be lower in the listing to be at the front. You can also adjust the order of the canvas itself by changing the sort order here. But the reason the button wasn't working wasn't because of a programming reason. It was because the background fade is basically blocking the it's blocking the actual functionality of the button. So you can see there's this thing here called Raycast Target. If you disable that and then try again, the button works, and this one does too. So yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, I kept going back over and over the code, and I couldn't figure out what the heck it was. Yeah, so that's the solution for that. So if you do have overlays or things like that, make sure that you've disabled the Raycast Target. Okay, so we've now got this loop of being able to push this button and have it revert. What we want to do next is what we had in the other scene, which is having the this button here raise and lower the visuals. So this is going to require a little bit more complexity. I'll just check the microphone's working still. Yeah. So for that, we're going to enhance our animation a bit more. So we're going to come back to the canvas. We're going to create two more states. So we're going to call this, what should we call this? Let's call it, this is something that could be used for a settings menu, so I'm just going to call it settings, let me think. Let's call it settings closed. Let's get that one done first. So, yeah, basically this is going to be the state in which, let me see if I can do this. Ooh. Oh wow, sorry, this snapped them together. Yeah, because they're occupying the same space. But essentially having this kind of pop down out of the mask and then rise up when we when we activate the scene. So what we can do to implement this is, as we did before, I'm going to show you the other way of kind of manipulating stuff with the animation. So what we can do is, rather than coming into this property section and having to dig through and all that stuff, we can select these. Let me see if there's an option to turn on. Is there a snapping function? Let me check whether there may already be a snapping function on. Nope. Never mind. We can do this by hand. This is where having numbers which are kind of easily placed comes in handy. So we've got 50 for the value. So we're going to move this I to -50. So we're going to adjust this number here. So you can see now that over the space of the timeline, this moves into the position of the button. And what we need is the button to then move the same distance. Yeah, so let's do that. So with the play button selected, we will set this to -150. So now, if we run this animation, they pop out in a really nice way. Yeah, so that's great. As with before, we need to make sure that the loop time is disabled, so that doesn't constantly trigger. And then we are going to need to make some adjustments to our animation. So let's bear with me a second. So you can see that we've, again, like with before, we've got this extra segment that's been added. So we need to adjust this now to factor in that we are going to be adding in these new two settings windows. What I'm going to do is, before we start messing around in here, I'm just for the sake of it being like a placeholder presence, I'm going to create the remaining property that we're going to remaining clip that we're going to make, which is going to be a settings, yeah, open, which we're going to do the inverse animation for. So as with previously, if you remember what we did for the fade in and out, I'm gonna, not gonna do that. Select those. Select inside the timeline, click inside the timeline first, then copy, go to open, paste, and then we're going to invert this to there. So now that rises up like that. So we have like this very basic framework in place now, where if I disconnect this, similar to what we had before, let me make that the, if you want to change the main state, you can either delete the, oh, you can't delete the original, you can select, wait, why is that not, make set machine default state. There we go. Okay, cool. So that's how you changed it to get it to prioritize another one. Because if I just create transition, it'll just create an extra line across. But the default state is defined by that. So yeah, if I now this bit's now disconnected, so it won't do anything. But I just want to show you, what this looks like in action. So we should have a little. Oh, looks like we've still got one of the animations looping. There we go. So that should mean we have a bit more of a calm animation. So it should just pop up and down, up and down. Yeah, real cute. Okay, that's great. So we have these systems, and we need to now kind of begin to mesh these together. And once we've done that, we're going to then kind of experiment and explore some like little tweaks and refinements you can do as part of that. But let's get the animation put together. So if we want to build this section of code, so we're gonna get the let me think. Yeah, we're going to basically figure out how to build this web. The one that has low relevance right now is the fade out function. So this is kind of redundant for now. We are going to come back to it, but we don't need to worry about it. We need the beginning state, and then we need to have, which is going to be fading in, and then we need to connect that to the default state, which is going to be for the button to be closed, which is going to be in its, if I visualize this, is it going to let me? Why is that not changing? Oh, I've got to select them, I think. Yeah. So like this is going to be the default state. So we need to have the fade in animation reflect this. So what I mean by that is that if we just connect up things as they are now, so if I make the default state go to here, which we need to do, that needs to be the first place it goes, and then from there connect to here, what you'll see is when the game runs, this will initially be up here and then move down into the position, which we don't want. So you could see that moved down initially. So if I just do it one more time. Yeah, so it faded in and then dropped. What we want is it to begin in the position where you're not seeing that additional button. This would be the equivalent of like having the settings menu open when you loaded up a game, the game menu for a first time, which is a bit rubbish, I think we can all agree. So the way you would fix that is if you go to, you've got the two buttons here. So this, if we go to settings open, or settings closed, whichever you fancy, the start state of this is how we want this to look. So if you remember before we copied both frames, we're just going to copy the first one, which is the kind of closed state. You can also access this this frame at the end of the closed animation here, either. And we're going to essentially just paste this into here, into the fade in animation. And you can see compared to what we had before, where it was up here like this, with this pasted in, it's relocated them to the default position, which is what we want. Yeah, and then we're also going to do the same for fade out as well, just for good measure. So now, if we watch this animation, you'll see that when we test this, obviously it's behaving a bit adverse now because we've got it constantly triggering. But if we we aren't going to have this piece of code tied to it, but I'm just going to appropriate the fade out block just to demonstrate this. So yeah, so if I let this load now, so it pops to there. and then if I click fade out, it pops up and then pops back down. Yeah, so if I just quickly run that again. Let me just quickly. Why does that immediately pop up? There's like a little peak. I'm not quite sure why it's doing that. So let me quickly check fade in again. Just a quick second. Okay, so we've got that. So what we can do next is now that we've got this linked, this is using the wrong variable. We need to create another Boolean for this. We're going to create a new Boolean, which we're going to call, let's call this settings open. So you can see that this is a different symbol. And we're going to access the conditions here, and we can add this. And you can see in just what I showed there, unintentionally, that you can have multiple conditions trigger simultaneously. So you could have something like game started, and you could have multiple things dependent on each other, which is quite useful. So yeah, so we have true and then false. Just a quick sec. Yeah, so you've got your variables, and you can see that I've got false. So when settings open is true, the path continues down to open. You can see when it is false, it travels back to closed. So if we test this now in game, so if I not do that, if that goes to here. So I use this, for example, this system for for Morse, I have it to control multiple characters. So when you've got the animation tools, I've got a integer which I use to determine which character is talking, and then I tie that to Ink, which is the tool that I use to hold all the narrative data, and I have that number correspond with a tag that the game looks for. So, you can essentially automate the character changing based on the script, which is really useful. So these are really powerful tools. So you can see that that's now working. So the last thing that we need to connect up as part of this is for both of these states here. So if I just get out of play mode, they need to have a means of getting to this fade out. So if we do a transition from here to here, to this, I'm still recording, just making sure. Yeah, so now we can trigger fade out with this. So either of these two states will trigger the fade out, and then this just needs to be left as an open line like this one, because this is just defined by time. The only thing I am going to do is I'm going to add like a little bit of exit time to this. I'm going to add like 5 seconds to give the illusion of transitioning between a different level. So if I test this, so the initial character pops up. If I push settings open, opens the menu. Click settings close, it closes the menu. If I click fade out, it fades out, and then it comes back in. Yeah, so that works really nicely. The kind of last thing that we need to do as part of that is actually tie this to the code events as part of it. The only thing that is bugging me significantly, that I need to grasp why it is happening, is why that you've got like a little bump that occurs when the initial animation plays. Let me check something. Does it fade in? I'm just trying to figure out, like, when the animation initially plays, it kind of flicks up. Oh, wait. Why doesn't that have... Oh, it does have the positions. That's weird. That's very strange. What it might be worth doing is moving those characters to those initial locations. I don't know if that would affect the start location. So if we try that, so we put that to negative 150, and then put this to 150. Whoops, nope, to negative 50. I wonder if that fixes it. No, it still bumps. That's very strange. Settings. Oh, I know what it is. Okay, so. Okay, okay, I figured it out now. So we don't want this to go to here first, because what's happening is if you look at this animation here, this closed animation starts with it fully opening and then goes to closed. What we want is for this to... We've set the animation to close at the start. So what it's doing is it's being closed on the first section, then reopening as it travels to here, and then closing. So that's really inefficient, or like it looks really naff. So what we want instead is, rather than connecting to here, we want to connect it to open. Whoops. To open. I can flip those around to make it a bit easier. And then we can include that clarify that we had before. So that settings open equals false. So settings open equals true, because we want it to trigger the animation state. So so when it starts, it's going to start in this closed position, and then when true is pushed, or settings is true, it's going to transition to that animation there. Oh, no, it won't. Yeah, sorry, that's right. So when you've pushed the button, that will trigger the state. And only then, it won't automatically run it. So if we test this now, and then at that point, it'll enter that kind of standard loop, and it can't go back to the state it was before. Oh, wait, sorry. Clicking doesn't mean anything at this point. So if I click settings open, that closes, that opens now. So you can see that we got rid of that little wiggle that was existing before that was very annoying to look at. And then fade out. And that connects back around to there. So works a charm. So what we're going to do now is we've got basically 1 or 2 more sections to go. Just like some little extra kind of artistic flair I want to kind of show you at the end, but for now we're just going to get the programming done. So if I just pop this open, so similar to what we had before, we're going to create a we're going to use our variable that we created before, and we're going to set bool instead of set trigger. So for this, you need 2 components. You need the string name, so that's going to be setting on, was it? Open, I think it was. Settings open, I think it was. Let me quickly check. Yep, settings open. So settings open is true. So if I test this now, if I quickly go back, oh, I've got an error. Oh, I must have missed an apostrophe on the end, right? So it's semicolon. Yep. Cool. Rookie error. So if we quickly test this, we have that pop open, but it doesn't go back down. So it should be pretty obvious what the kind of solution is at this point. You've got kind of 2 options here. You could either create a custom little variable which checks whether it's open or closed, or you could do if button anim dot get bool settings open is equal to equal to true. And then bob and else. Yep. So that goes there. This goes here. False. Yeah, so that should now give us the 2 states that we need. So if we quickly test that. Pops open, closes, and then press to fade, and then restarts. So you can see that when it restarts, it automatically opens the function. So what we probably want to add as part of this as well is in that trigger function, we want to add as well as an extra line saying settings open equals false. And then that way you will have it fully reset the menu. Cool. So that's all set. That's basically like the core of the functionality done. I just want to kind of show you a couple of extra little creative flair, bits of flair that you want to consider. I've shown you quite a basic implementation of how this stuff works, but I want you to kind of keep in mind that there is a ton that you can do with this tool. So just as like a real kind of quick example, as you might have seen in the earlier version, you can literally access every variable of this. I mean, not literally every variable, but like the majority of variables. So I could do something like, I hope I've got the right axis here, we'll see. No, I did it wrong. Okay, bear with me. You've got to put it to the end of the transition if you're wanting to actually see the change. Yeah, so like even just changing that rotational variable, you now have this very little cute little, where is it? Oh yeah. Yeah, you got a real cute little animation, and then like you can expand that further. There's a whole principle called squash and stretch. This is like a kind of a core principle from animation. Looney Tunes are a fantastic example of squash and stretch in action. Where or something like anime, where like you will have the proportions of characters like grossly distorted to emphasize additional effect. A very famous example is with like Scooby-Doo, where Shaggy and Scoob like run on the spot for like 5 seconds or something like that, and then absolutely like zoom off out of the picture near instantly. Like that's kind of like it's rather than having a linear curve of movement, like it would be a lot more dull if they just kind of ran off at and a lot less iconic if they just ran off at a linear speed. It would look very dull. So the way that you can adjust those speeds is if you go into curves here. So you can see that there's this option here. You've got dope sheet and then you've got curves. So if we bring this up a bit, you can adjust the scale of the curves using this to the right hand side here. So if I bring this right back so you can see the whole curve. One thing that is homework for you lot to try and figure out is I don't know how you manipulate curves simultaneously. So because like you can select both of them, but you can't it doesn't appear that you can manipulate both curves at the same time, which is very annoying because like that does impact accuracy of how your animation is played. So what I'm doing here is like these curves. If I just try, if I narrow them a bit, that's the opposite of what I want it to do. Nope. Bear with me a sec. There we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've simplified this down to a much more extreme curve. Just so we can kind of see the relief a little bit better. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. So, yeah, like if I manipulate these curves, you can see like a noticeable difference in how the animation responds. So what I might need to do is just I'll tell you what will make it prominent. If I emphasize it to kind of what's known as absurdium, like if you make it really like overextended, it should be. So you can see that it kind of curves up before it reaches its final location. If I just do that again. Oh wow, it didn't like that. Let's run that again. Yeah, so you can see there it kind of, obviously the mask becomes a bit of a problem there, but you could see that it just kind of added a little bit more emphasis. And you could take that even to a more absurd level where you curve it down before you curve it up. So you could do something like this, where so it bounces down before it comes back up. Yeah, and you can, and obviously that's a very extreme example. The other way you could do it is you could go the opposite way and have the, I keep forgetting to unclick play. So if I open it up, you can see that there was a little bounce when it got to the end there. So again, and you can see it in this case, it actually caught up with the, play button because it was descending at such a speed that it actually caught up with it. So yeah, you can see the difference that makes. And yeah, you can use this in lots of different ways. One thing that you could do with this is you could reduce the initial acceleration, so it kind of accelerates more dramatically and then overcompensates. So if I just do this one more time. I'm not gonna lie, the rotation is upsetting me because it looks gross because it's rotating too quickly. So I'm gonna extend that a little bit further. It's like a second, I think, just because I really don't like how fast that's rotating. Okay, let's there's probably a happy middle ground somewhere. Like, a lot of this is about kind of experiment. Oh, whoops. A lot of this is about experimentation and refining stuff to have something that feels good. See, that feels a little bit better. Just extending it a bit more. Yeah. So yeah, you can mess with all these variables. If I adjust the second one to kind of match it a little bit more. Again, I don't know how you copy there is one way you can do it. You can copy from the dope sheet the curve, but then you need to adjust the coordinates, which is a really kind of irritating method of having to adjust curves. So functionally for now, this is the best way to do it, which is not great. It's not optimal. Trying to kind of match these up eyeballing it essentially. So if I've done that for closed, if we do the same for open now. So so for this, have it dip down, and then curve up for the finish. Dip down, curve up for the finish. Cool. So if we check this fully through now. You can see now we've got something that feels a little bit more animated compared to what we had before. Yeah, which is much nicer. So yeah, I'd encourage you to kind of experiment with this stuff. And this isn't me. This is I've not even got into things like scaling buttons. So for example, if you didn't want to have like the 3D effect, you could have it that when you push the button, you actually decrease the scale of the button, and you could have like a squishy effect to it as it's being pushed, which would be quite charming. Yeah, there's like a lot that you can experiment with this stuff with. I love, like I've mentioned to you before, how much I love UI and like how much experimentation you can do with this stuff. But yeah, like it's just so much fun to mess around with. The only other thing I just want to really quick mention, which is just kind of like more from a tidiness perspective, is if you've noticed it's kind of a bit sluggish, the UI, in terms of the transitions between, you can tighten that up a little bit by, like, you can see that there's like about a second delay before it actually triggers. What you can do is you can tighten that up by coming into here, and you can see that there's this thing called has exit time, and you can see it's nearly got like half a second of exit time. If you knock that down to 0.1, that should make things a little bit more snappy. So if we speed those up for all of those, because you do want your UI to not be, as you saw before, like if it's too snappy, it kind of gets a bit jarring. But you want your buttons to be responsive, and you want your UI to kind of, to feel responsive. So you can see that is already responding a little bit better. It's still not perfect, but obviously in time you can kind of refine these things a little bit better. So that's kind of everything I wanted to cover today. This is kind of just basics in terms of scratching the surface. There's so much creative possibility in designing UI. As I said, it's one of these elements that seems really dull when you start out, but you can just end up designing some like incredibly beautiful, elegant stuff. And I'd really, really encourage you to take the time to develop your own UIs for your projects, because ultimately it's the first thing that the players see when they open the game. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.